This is a copy of the Sverdlovsk newspaper from November the 29th, 1968. An article on the front page entitled Berezovsky Dreams, or What Was That?, gives the state's sanctioned account of what could have been the actual crash. Translated, the Russian copy reads, 5 glowing balls of light appeared over the horizon and started to move in the direction of the city. 4 of the objects moved in opposite directions, while the 5th began to rapidly lose altitude and soon completely disappeared behind the forest terrain. Several seconds after its disappearance, there was a deafening explosion. And in typical Soviet fashion, the paper cites the official statement. The blast had taken place at the grain storage unit number 27. The explosion was caused by one of the employees who had violated a safety code, resulting in a charge of negligence. He was sentenced to restitution of the material losses suffered by the state. What helps make the account in Vereshchagin's book so compelling is the existence of several reels of film which seem to back up the story. While rumors of such film first began circulating some years ago, it was not until Vereshchagin led us to the black market dealer in possession of these materials that we got our first look at what could be remarkable new evidence. If this film indeed corresponds with Vereshchagin's story, what we are looking at is the scene of the crash site in Berezovsky as viewed by a camera on top of a military truck. The focal point of this scene is here, and indeed appears to be a disc embedded in the ground. Here we see soldiers exiting the truck, led by a captain. The troops are met by another officer, this one a major, and then they join other soldiers and officers already on the scene. This footage is one of 4 reels of film acquired during our investigation. This film footage certainly seems to depict interest by Russian military personnel in the object that is seen sticking out of the ground. Soldiers, officers, and civilian-clothed agents are deployed around the site, and they appear to be both guarding and examining the object. This is what we found on one of the 4 reels of film obtained in Russia. After viewing the footage, we were able to determine that it was most likely shot with 2 separate cameras, one apparently a handheld camera, which starts out on the approaching truck, and a second one seen here on a tripod. As the soldiers march past, you can see the cameraman turn to follow the troops. Here we cut to the other angle, the point of view from the tripod camera. And here you see the handheld camera as the truck pulls up. Both cameras change vantage points several times during the film, as if to get better views, or perhaps under orders of a superior. From this angle, we see yet more troops arrive. Author Veniamin Vereshchagin describes the event. And here you see the man who is probably the head KGB agent directing the cameraman to point his camera toward the disc. A total of almost 1,200 feet of negative were recovered just to speculate on how the object ended up here. Based on information from Vereshchagin's book and what we can see in this footage, we have created this computer-animated version of how researchers believe the crash may have occurred. The questions then become, where did this object come from and how did it come to crash here? And more importantly, what has happened to it since? So it was with a sense of both excitement and caution that we examined the footage recently recovered in Russia. This reel contains images of what appears to be a scientific or medical examination of organic body parts. The individuals seen here appear to be forensic pathologists or biological research scientists. Speaking in Russian, they are seen inspecting the specimen, the leader of the procedure describing his actions and the measurements they are taking. After several minutes of this, there is a change in camera angles. Now we see the specimen being more extensively examined.
Придерживайте инструмент. Ткани разрезаются тяжело. Пробуем кусачки. Придерживайте. Ребра пытаюсь перекусить. Так, нож.
Tools are used to cut open what the leader constantly refers to as tissue.
Что-то белое попадает. Очень ригидные ткани. Давайте попробуем другим. Придерживайте. Оцените вот этот вот лоскут. Инструмент. Нет, пинцет.
He also describes parts that are removed as resembling various organs.
Записывайте, достаем внутренние органы, надрезаем похожую на клетчатку внутреннюю ткань.
The camera angle changes again. And finally, the scientists are seen posing for the camera, holding up various samples of the dissection. If this footage is authentic, it represents one of the greatest scientific discoveries of all time. One must wonder where this film was shot and what happened to the specimen seen. If this is footage of a genuine scientific examination, what happened to the results? What did the Soviets learn, and what have they done with that knowledge? Did agents of the KGB have reason to keep this secret for so many years? Certainly there are more questions here than answers. Case in point, the intriguing film footage we had acquired. Proof, some say, of alien visitation. Being that this material is of such sensational nature, we had many questions regarding its history. Little information was provided us by the black market dealer from whom the film was purchased. It is likely that such materials were kept stored in a holding facility, a vault located beneath KGB headquarters perhaps, reserved only for those with the highest level of security clearance. This former agent was able to confirm interest not only in the 1968 crash near Sverdlovsk, but in other Soviet attempts to recover UFO documentation and technology. Alien reverse engineering. If the Russians had in fact recovered an extraterrestrial vehicle, as they seem to be doing in this footage, they no doubt would have wanted to benefit from its technology.
And the kicker is the fact that you get troops out there and a cameraman doesn't necessarily mean it's a flying saucer. We need to be a little cautious about jumping to conclusions. Now, I think that film is worth a detailed investigation. Those things cost a lot of money, actually, to go over it. You have different specialists looking at, you know, are the uniforms correct for the time frame? Is the film actually made in the Soviet Union?
We asked Russian film expert Sergei Goncharov to examine the film for its authenticity. He first explained the background of the film cans.
And this is the name of the factory that manufactures the motion picture film in the city of Pereslavl. This is the type of film type A2, which is the emulsion.
After Sergei examined the cans, he felt that they were authentic and consistent with the area and time period from which they had allegedly come.
Now that we've looked at the cans, the next thing to do was to actually find out if the film itself had any markings on it. Okay, in the very beginning of the film, we have this word, which in Russian says начало, or the beginning, or the start. Now, the next bit of information are these two items, M-A-R-T, Mart, which is the month of March, 1969, letter G for year. So the year of 1969, the month of March. Okay, then we have the two bits of information which says plyonka number 267. Plyonka in Russian means emulsion or film could denote the reel, the roll, or batch, and this, of course, is the number. The next thing we see is this bit of information. Совершенно секретно, top secret archive of the KGB logo and the word archive of the KGB.
Finally, Sergei Goncharov compared the markings on the film itself to what was printed on the cans.
As you notice right here on the edge of the negative, we have the word безопасная пленка, meaning safety film, and tip A2 or type A2, which is exactly the information that you have on a can.
Next, we showed the film to Russian researcher Paul Stonehill.
The colors of the film, the quality, soldier uniforms. Somebody would have to go into special, to make a special effort to make a film that feels like something that was made in 1960s. I've seen a lot of films made in the 1960s, and this film here is almost of the same quality. It's not a 1980s or 1990s film. The KGB officer that had been looking and touching things looks quite genuine. To me, my gut feeling is this is not something that they had made intentionally to fool people.
You see, of course, it wouldn't be possible to duplicate, as a hoax. You would have to hire some actors and so on. But it was quite well done, aimed against the Americans, so something we never heard of it. So that's also dubious.
Finally, while Mr. Hernandez felt that the film required more investigation, he was impressed and intrigued by it.
Well, I would say that if this is real, and
this footage, which seems to depict Russian pathologists dissecting what appears to be a non-human life form, requires further analysis. We then asked film expert Sergei Goncharov if he thought that the film's characteristics on this reel were consistent with the time period from which it was supposedly shot.
It certainly is consistent with the information on the can. It is negative. It's got the negative perforations. It's exactly what the information on a can indicated.
Sergei explains the significance of a flash frame, an interesting and possibly important characteristic of the film that was discovered.
All right, now, a flash frame, this is, of course, a flash frame is that piece of film that is, when you push the button on the camera and you start exposure and you stop the camera to stop the exposure, and then you restart the camera again. By virtue of inertia, the camera will sometimes expose either a flash of light, or if you point the camera away from the person in front of it, you will see some other subject matter. Those flash frames appear between the takes and sometimes show things and people that are not part of the scene itself. You have people that have nothing to do with the information that you've seen on a film before or after. Again, an individual in uniform. You see these people performing a procedure. You have somebody in civilian clothes, people that you have not seen before, as this is in a flash frame segment, which was not meant to be as the procedure that was being photographed.
Mr. Goncharov concludes that while the film's stock and camera techniques are consistent with KGB and Soviet government films of that period, he feels that the discrepancies with the subject matter require closer scrutiny.
Anytime you have subject matter of this type, any additional investigation is worthwhile. Absolutely.
And this, of course, is typical of Russian-Soviet medicine. I mean, when we think of Chernobyl, just remember back that there was a terrible lapse in any type of protection. It certainly would not happen in the United States. I mean, it would be unheard of.
Next, Dr. Ryan commented on some of the specific medical procedures.
All right, what's happening here is that they're using dissecting scissors to open up the sternum, which is a common procedure at that time. He's using the proper tool. The way they're holding and using the various tools looks correct, which indicates to me these people know what they're doing. I would say there's little doubt that these are actual Russian medical people. Now, if you look closely at this procedure here, which is repeated several times in this footage, what they're doing is removing a piece of material. The one doctor refers to it as an organ or resembling an organ. Then the diener snips off a small sample which is placed in a specimen jar for later analysis. Well, that's exactly what would be done in a forensic case or in the case of scientific research, for instance, if some new species had been discovered. They would remove very small pieces for later chemical and microscopic examination. The lead doctor also mentions a structure he describes as resembling ribs. And here you can see what indeed resembles a rib cage, as if this was the torso of some anthropoid or human-like organism.
Finally, though Dr. Ryan was unable to identify the subject matter, she believes that the techniques were consistent with those practiced in the Soviet Union during the late 1960s. We have little information about the specimen seen here, other than the pathologist's description and the KGB code name, Sverdlovsk midget. We wondered, though, how such a being might appear had it been recovered intact. Further investigation and make it much easier to simply write off any UFO account or evidence as nonsense. This incredible footage depicts members of the Soviet armed forces and what are believed to be 2 KGB agents inspecting and recovering a crashed flying saucer. Russian author Benjamin Vereshchagin has an idea. Attempting to verify the authenticity of this evidence, we have had the footage and the film itself examined by several experts. We also carefully studied the documents we had procured, which lent further credibility to what we had been told. Among the most telling was this top-secret KGB report specifically referring to Operation Sverdlovsk Midget and describing in detail the recovery operation at Beryozovsky. This document mentions the crashed disc, the organic remains, and the filming itself. There was also this secret order from the Soviet Ministry of Defense requesting assistance from military unit 67527. We looked closely at such elements of the footage as the uniforms and the arm patches worn by the soldiers. These patches seem consistent with the patch worn by such Soviet Army air defense companies as military unit 67527.
They're all wearing winter coats, which don't appear to have much in the way of insignia on them. And that is not out of character for the winter coats. They would generally not contain much in the way of identification. These are all members of the same unit. I can see that the weapons are AK-type weapons. The main battle weapon of the Russian army, even up through today's date, is the automatic Kalashnikov weapon. Yeah, it's clearly an AK, fixed stock, birch stock, no muzzle brake, milled receiver, no question about it. That also seems to be consistent with the muzzles of the weapons that I can see in this film.
In addition, we had notes from the scientific examination of the recovered organic specimen, which seemed consistent with the soundtrack of the dissection footage. With so many elements in seeming consistency, Vereshchagin's story becomes even more tantalizing and perplexing at the same time. Is it possible the Russians actually recovered an alien craft and its occupant 3 decades ago? In the course of our investigation, our goal was to follow every lead, to search for every scrap of information regarding the incident so named Operation Sverdlovsk Midget. The tenuous paper trail we have reconstructed using recovered government documents led us eventually to a lab of the former All-Union Scientific Research Institute of Biology. In attempting to obtain records on the individuals depicted in the dissection footage, we turned up these additional documents. 3 death certificates, all dated March the 24th, 1969, within a week after records indicate the examination was performed. Cause of death for all 3, cerebral hemorrhage. Dr. Ryan told us that the odds of this occurring naturally are next to 0. The former state-run institute is now a private teaching center known as the Moscow Medical Institute. That this is the same facility as seen in the film footage becomes obvious with a comparison of such fixtures as the stonework tables and the distinctive tiling on the floors. Indeed, many questions about the film footage and the alleged Operation Sverdlovsk midget remain unanswered. Any extraordinary find, such as the apparent filmed record of a crashed spacecraft, or of what appears to be scientists examining parts of an alien life form, require further analysis. Yet it seems incredible that so many elements of this story from so many diverse sources appear consistent. The original account as told by researchers and witnesses, the recovered documents, and of course, the film. Thank you for joining us.